Today we're going to be making some black bean soup, a real staple in my household, so let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to start with is I washed some black beans, just washed out in a couple rinses of clean water, and ditch the water. I'm not soaking them. If you want to watch my bean soaking guide, you'll know why. I'll put a link up somewhere about that. And there's really no need to soak them. They're going to cook perfectly fine without soaking. And the only thing I'm going to do is add some vegetables to them to add more flavor into this, because this is basically going to be the broth that we're going to be eating. That's going to be making up the base of the soup. So I'm just going to dice some onions. The onions are just going to melt in to the soup, and it's going to give a lot more flavor to the whole thing. So that's going to go in there. We're going to do some garlic. And this I'm also going to dice, or smash and cut to small pieces. Because all this is just going to end up being really what's going to be giving all the flavor to your soup. There's no meat in here, so you really got to help it as much as you can. The more vegetables you can kind of stick in here, especially the aromatic stuff, the better it's going to be. I've got some just celery stems that were just old, kind of sitting in the fridge. I'm just going to put those in whole. We're going to pull them out later. And a carrot that I'm also going to dice. And that's just going to end up, like the onions and the garlic, melting into everything and making a really delicious bean broth. We're also going to add some more aromatics, such as some bay leaves and some thyme. And that's really all we're going to put in here. I'm not going to add any salt, no pepper, just some vegetables to kind of give it some body, and the beans themselves will provide a really delicious broth. So we're just going to let that simmer until those beans are done or almost done, and then we'll get started on the base to our soup. Alright, now we're going to get down to making the actual base to this soup. First I'm going to go in with a pretty healthy amount of olive oil. I found that if you're making vegan food, I know that seems like a lot of freaking oil. When you're making vegan food, which this is, you really need to add fat where you can. That's really going to make it satisfying to eat. So I got a ton of olive oil in there. I'm going to go in with some black pepper. The black pepper is going to bloom in the oil. I'm using a lot of black pepper too, and you're not even going to really notice it in the final product. Some onion. I know I use so much oil it seems like I'm kind of deep frying it, but this really makes vegan food so much more satisfying. You could just throw everything into a pot and boil the crap out of it, but it's not really going to be terribly interesting to eat. What we want to do is we want to develop each of these ingredients, because it's such a simple dish. We want to develop all these flavors as much as possible. So we're going to start with onion and garlic. We're going to go in some celery. I'm going to dice up. Basically what you're making here is like what you would call a sofrito, a vegetable base that's going to cook down, and what you're making basically is a stock cube or some sort of concentrated flavor. It's going to be better than any stock cube that you'll ever get at the store, though. So we're just going to dice up these vegetables. And we're going to throw them in here. While the beans are over there simmering away, they'll take as long as they need to. Can't rush this kind of thing. It's really about taking care of your food, taking the time, and paying attention to what you're doing. Because like I said, you could just throw all this stuff into a pot and boil the crap out of it. It's not going to be very much fun. So we got our onion, garlic, celery, carrot in there. I've also got some green pepper that I'm also going to kind of dice. Pepper's really going to fall apart, so you don't need a super fine dice on that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to let these onions, garlic, carrot, and celery just kind of soften up and cook down a little bit. And get that stuff going. Once that stuff's really kind of where you want it to be, where you've developed some of the sweetness, taken out some of the rawness, you'll be good to go with the bell pepper. So I'm going to dice this bell pepper, the whole thing, but I'm only going to use half of it first. Something that I learned from watching Paul Prudhomme. He talks about layering these vegetables, kind of creating different layers of different levels of cooked vegetables. So what he would do would be to use bell pepper and tomato, which is what we're going to do, and do a little bit at a time. Put it in, let it cook down, put in the next batch, let that cook down, and he might do that 3 or 4 times. We're only going to do that twice, but that's really sufficient for what we're looking for. So we're going to wait for the rest of this to cook down, and then we're going to get going on the bell pepper and tomatoes. Alright, now that this stuff is softened down a bit, we're going to go in with half of the bell pepper. And we're just going to take a few canned tomatoes. I'm using whole tomatoes here. You use diced. Doesn't really matter. You could definitely use fresh tomatoes. That's going to give you a ton of flavor. But totally different flavor. And you're going to want to smash these up a little bit. Careful, because they're going to squirt at you. Really release those juices. They're still not that soft at the moment, but they will soften up. And what you're going to end up really making with this is kind of a homemade tomato paste. And when you concentrate that tomato flavor down, once you add everything else into it, it just adds so much flavor and so much depth. And we're going to let that go until the tomato kind of starts to stick to the bottom of the pot. I'm going to take the heat up to kind of a medium high kind of thing. Once the tomatoes start to stick to the bottom of the pot a little bit, I'll show you that later. Then we're going to go in with our next round of bell pepper and tomato. Okay, so we've got some really nice stickage here. I don't know if you can see that. The tomato's really starting to stick down in the pan there. Let's scrape that off. That's kind of what we're going for, and you can smell that sweetness, the sugars in the tomato, really coming through here. And the trick to this is you want to kind of take it as far as you can without burning it. You'll really develop the most amount of flavor possible. You take it to that point, almost the point of no return, but not past. So now we're going to go in with the other bell pepper half. A little more tomato. Not the juice, just the tomatoes. Do one more. Smash these up. Try not to squirt yourself with hot tomato, oily tomato juice. And you can kind of deglaze the bottom of your pan with the new liquid that you just put in, because that's going to come out of those vegetables. And you can see now it's cleaned up. We just got all that off, all from that liquid that we just put in from the tomatoes and the bell peppers. And we're going to repeat that process all over again. I'm going to do the same thing to the new batch of bell pepper and tomato that we put in. And then we'll be adding some aromatics, and the beans should be pretty much done at that point, so we can combine everything together and kind of let it simmer for a while. And then we'll be pretty much out of here. Alright, so a few minutes later, look at that beautiful browning on the bottom of the pot. That right there, we've taken it right to the edge. If I leave that any longer, that's going to burn. And we don't want that. Don't want to ruin dinner. So I'm going to go in with some water. It smells awesome because you've really taken your time making sure that you're cooking things well. Getting those flavors in there that are locked in the vegetables. You're unlocking them. And the olive oil is going to give it some good flavor too. I'm going to check on these beans. These beans are done. They've been cooking for about an hour. Not that much. What we're going to do is we're going to pull out the thyme stems, those big pieces of celery that I had in there. They've done their job. All this stuff has done its work. And you really want to bite down on some gnarly stem. I'm just going to dump this in here. Careful not to splash yourself. Don't want to waste any of that. I'm going to throw in a couple more bay leaves, just add a little more flavor, a little more aroma. That tomato. go ahead and try a bit of a taste here. Now's the point where I'm going to season this pretty liberally, because I didn't use any salt at any point up to now. Another little taste. That's pretty good. Now we're just going to let that simmer kind of low, maybe for another half hour or so, and then our soup will be done. And there you go, delicious black bean soup. Took about an hour and a half from scratch, from dry beans, no soaking. You really don't need to do that. You're not wasting time, but you're not saving that much. Didn't take me that long to make this beautiful pot of soup and this beautiful bowl in about an hour and a half. So there you go. Check it out next time for more bean stuff.